Have you ever thought about how fragile our global economy really is? It might surprise you to learn that a huge chunk of it depends on a tiny strip of water just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. This is the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most important oil choke point. And for decades, there's been a looming question: what if Iran decides to close it? Let's dive into this geopolitical powder keg and explore what would happen, from the immediate shockwaves to the long-term global fallout. The Strait of Hormuz is the only sea passage from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Think of it as the jugular vein of the global energy market. Every single day, about 20 million barrels of oil, that's roughly 20% of the world's total consumption, pass through this strait. On top of that, about a third of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, also makes this journey. Countries like China, Japan, India, South Korea, and many in Europe are heavily dependent on these shipments. So, a closure isn't just a regional issue, it's a global crisis waiting to happen. So, how could Iran actually close it? It's not as simple as putting up a giant gate. A closure would be a military operation. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' navy has a strategy built on what military analysts call asymmetric warfare. They wouldn't try to match the US Navy's aircraft carriers head-on. Instead, they'd use a swarm of fast attack craft, anti-ship missiles fired from mobile coastal launchers, sea mines, and even submarines. Imagine this: hundreds of small, agile boats, armed with rockets and machine guns, swarming larger oil tankers. At the same time, a barrage of anti-ship missiles targets any military vessels trying to intervene. And to make things even more chaotic, they could deploy thousands of naval mines, turning the strait into a deadly, invisible minefield. These mines are relatively cheap and can be laid quickly by small boats or submarines, making them incredibly difficult and time-consuming to clear. The goal isn't to sink every ship, but to make the strait so dangerous that no shipping company or insurer would dare to send their vessels through. The psychological impact would be immense. The moment Iran announces a closure and starts mining the strait, the global markets would go into a frenzy. The price of oil would skyrocket, not just by a few dollars, but potentially doubling or even tripling overnight. We could see oil prices hitting $200, $300 a barrel, or even higher. Why? Because you've just instantly removed 20% of the global oil supply from the market, and traders would panic, buying up whatever they can get their hands on, anticipating a prolonged shortage. This price shock would be felt immediately at the gas pump. Imagine gas prices doubling or tripling in a matter of days. For the average person, that means your daily commute, your road trips, and even the cost of groceries, since they are transported by trucks, would all become drastically more expensive. This would act like a massive tax on consumers worldwide, slashing disposable income and grinding economic activity to a halt. Stock markets would plummet, airlines, shipping companies, and manufacturing industries would be hit the hardest. The global economy, already dealing with various pressures, could be tipped into a severe recession. The ripple effects would be enormous. Countries heavily reliant on imported energy, like Japan and South Korea, would face an existential economic crisis. Their factories could be forced to shut down, leading to mass layoffs. Power blackouts could become a reality. Of course, the world wouldn't just sit back and watch. The United States has long declared that freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz is a vital national security interest. The US Navy's Fifth Fleet is based in nearby Bahrain for this very reason. A closure of the strait would almost certainly trigger a swift and powerful military response from the United States and its allies. The immediate goal would be to reopen the strait. This would involve a massive and dangerous operation. Minesweepers, protected by destroyers, cruisers, and aircraft from carrier strike groups, would have to painstakingly clear the waterway of mines. This is a slow, methodical process, and these vessels would be vulnerable to attacks from Iranian fast boats, drones, and missiles. Simultaneously, we'd likely see airstrikes targeting Iranian naval bases, missile launch sites, command and control centers, and port facilities along Iran's coast. The objective would be to degrade Iran's ability to interfere with the clearing operation and to deter further attacks. It would be a high-stakes conflict, with the potential for significant casualties on both sides and the risk of escalation. What would escalation look like? Iran could retaliate by targeting US military bases in the region or striking key infrastructure in allied Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Think of their massive oil processing facilities or desalination plants. An attack on these would not only worsen the oil crisis but also create a humanitarian disaster. This could draw other regional powers into the conflict, turning it from a US-Iran confrontation into a full-blown regional war. The potential for miscalculation would be terrifyingly high, with every action and reaction risking a wider, more devastating conflict. Let's say the US and its allies succeed in reopening the strait after a few weeks or months of fighting. The damage would already be done. The oil price shock would have sent the global economy into a tailspin. But even after the fighting stops, the danger wouldn't be over. Insurance premiums for shipping through the strait would remain astronomically high. The perceived risk would linger for a long time, meaning the cost of transporting oil would stay elevated, keeping prices higher than they were before the crisis. countries would also be forced to rethink their energy security. This crisis would accelerate the global shift away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and nuclear power. Nations would frantically build up their strategic petroleum reserves and diversify their energy suppliers, trying to become less dependent on the volatile Middle East. In the long run, this could ironically weaken the geopolitical influence of oil-producing nations, but the human cost would be the most tragic. A conflict in the Strait would result in military and civilian casualties. It would destabilize the entire Middle East, potentially leading to new waves of refugees and exacerbating existing humanitarian crises in places like Yemen and Syria. The political fallout would reshape alliances and international relations for decades to come. So, while a full-scale closure of the Strait of Hormuz remains a worst-case scenario, it's not an impossible one. It's a move Iran might consider if it felt its own survival was at stake. For example, in response to a military strike on its nuclear facilities. The deterrent is the certainty of a devastating military and economic response. It's a classic case of mutually assured destruction, but on an economic and regional scale. The Strait of Hormuz is a powerful reminder of how interconnected our world is and how a conflict in one narrow waterway can plunge the entire globe into chaos. Understanding these stakes is crucial because the ripples from this tiny strait can reach every single one of us. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the events shaping our world. See you next time.